Hey YouTube, Casey Classic 7 here, back again with another video. Got some NBA 2K18 here. This is going to be a preview of a roster that I have been revamping. This is originally EZMadden's Fictional High School Hoops roster. Shout out to him. As you guys know, anytime when creating a fictional roster, for those who are into fictional rosters, it's a huge task, and you gotta give those guys as much props and shout out and as much love um, as you can whenever you are um, talking about them. Like anytime those guys make rosters, there should be videos praising them because it's a lot of work when creating a fictional roster or any roster in general, but really a fictional roster because you have to literally go in and create every single player and kind of make them unique if that's the style of roster that you're going for to every other player. So gotta give them a shout out for that. Um, but when he originally came out with this roster, every player was missing their play styles. So that's what I did. I came in and edited the playstyles for every player that needed their playstyles edited it. So I didn't edit every single player's playstyle. Since this was a high school based roster, and for anyone who watches high school hoops or is familiar with it, you guys know that every player on the team isn't a focal point. So I wanted whoever the star players on each team or the star players throughout the league, um, because this is also a roster that is compatible with your MyLeague. So I wanted those players to um, shine, and the role players, play in their role. But I wanted those star players to really shine in with the play styles, and the other players who don't have any play styles, I wanted them to kind of focus on whatever that they were good at, or whatever the case may be. So certain players definitely have no plays at all because they just they wouldn't have plays when you're talking about high school roster. Some of these players are just filler players, are just on the team, for whatever reason. So that's kind of how my idea was when I went through and um, gave players um, gave players play styles versus didn't give player play styles. And the way that I based um, the priority was based on that specific player. So we're going to take this guy Dion Adams, for example. Since we're on this team, he has pick and roll man and mid range. In my opinion, I think that he would be more effective as a pick and roll man versus a mid range shooter, even though mid range is something that he is very, very good at. So that's why I made him a roll man first before I made him a mid-range shooter. But for the most part, whatever skills that player possesses is going to be the play style of that player. So if a player doesn't possess any skills, he's not going to have any plays for that specific player. I also was looking at the um, actual play style of the player. As you see, he's an interior defender, so that's the thing that I want him to focus most on. But even with him being an interior defender, he also is going to have an offensive role on the team since he is one of the better players on the team. So I just was kind of trying to make it as balanced as possible, so where players weren't playing outside of their play styles, um, as well as they weren't being too ineffective by not having a lot of play styles and they were a star player on that team. Um, so that's kind of how my mindset was when deciphering who gets what um, in terms of their play styles and the plays that are going to be designed for them. So that was my mindset. So overall, again, I tried to make this as realistic as possible. Um, but that's kind of for you guys to determine. But I think that even having any place having any plays called for players is better than having no plays. That's where it was before this roster. Is a good thing. And the reason why it's so important for these players for players that have play styles is because when a team's not running freelance offense, or when the when the AI or CPU coaches are trying to call specific plays, and there's none that are active, they aren't going to do anything on the floor. They're just going to hold the ball for 20 seconds, pass to make a one pass, two pass, and throw up a bad shot. So that's why it's very important for team, every team and players to have their play styles. So um, for the future, whenever EZMadden does make a roster, I hope that he does put that into consideration, um, to make sure that the play styles are accounted for whenever he's making these rosters. Another thing that I'm going to be critical of the roster about is the coaching as well. I understood the concept that he wanted every coach on every team not to be an NBA coach, which obviously makes sense. That's what anybody would want. But in the same breath, um, the coaches for each team, it doesn't mesh well for some teams with the actual roster. So that's why I'm going to specifically use his roster as a fantasy draft. As a fantasy draft when I actually get to my MyLeague and using this roster, because hopefully when these teams redraft themselves out, they'll be more balanced and the rosters will just overall make sense, and they'll draft based on the philosophy of their team, based on more than having the best players available on their team. So that's kind of why I wanted to go in and fix this, and wanted it to be a fantasy draft roster. So for example, as you see, this team is a team that wants to play patient, get their shooters open. But if you actually look at the design of this roster, this team doesn't have many shooters. Like they have a lot of players who can hit the mid range, but in terms of actually being shooters, there aren't that many shooters on their team. This guy is a shooter, and I guess you can qualify this guy as a shooter as well. So for a team that primarily wants to run their team through shooting the ball, they don't have any shooters to do that. So again, hopefully, whenever or whenever the teams draft their players back out, they draft based on their philosophy. Um, and even though I'm being a critic of this roster, this doesn't mean I don't like the roster. It doesn't mean it's not appreciated. But when I see rosters like Tim of the Hyatt, when I see rosters that Bebe 3235 make, even though last year he used Tim of the Hyatt's base roster, you still do have to compare those on the same level, because when you see the level of detail that Tim the Hyatt, Leo Allure, also some of you may know him as, go through versus a roster like this, it's not comparable. The way that Leo Allure goes through his roster process and just the whole thing is just a lot more sophisticated than this. But it's not to take anything away from this roster, because again, like I said, doing this project, it's a huge task. It's a lot of work. And a lot of work that a lot of people will not even think about going through. So it's not to bash EZMadden for not making a sophisticated roster, but I do have to also say that because that is the actual case. So just want to give you guys a preview of my feelings on EZMadden's roster. Definitely shout out to him. Definitely very innovative as well. I'm not sure if he came up with his I don't know. I'm not sure he came up with the idea of how to actually get the high school. or get the prospects at a high school level, because there's a whole process in that. I'm not going to give that away since that's something that I had to message him privately about, and I'm going to respect the privacy. So if you guys want to know that, you can hit up EZMadden specifically on Twitter. That's where I hit him up. I'll have links to the original roster in the description. I'll have links to his Twitter in in the description, as well as I'll have the name of this roster in the description as well. I'm not sure what I'm going to call this roster, but it's going to obviously be something that's tied to EZMadden's name, since this is his roster and he did the majority of the work on this roster as well. He also has other roster projects out there as well. That's why I don't want to be overly critical as well, but again, I still do have to be a critic, since this was a roster that was labeled as being 100% complete, and unfortunately that just was not the case. In my opinion, I would call this more of like a base roster or a work in progress roster, more than anything else. Another thing that you also have to applaud him for is every player's play styles. I mean, not every player's signatures and shoes have been edited, so you don't have anybody in those hideous 2K shoes. You don't have anybody with the same play styles either. I mean, with the same signatures, signature animations either. So definitely have to give them a shout out for that. Going through every single player, fixing up their signature animations. So shout out. I have to give them a shout out, like I said, for that. So hopefully, with me editing these rosters, it makes the gameplay feel a little bit better. By this point, there also may be players who've already done this within their MyLeague, but I definitely wanted to have something so the public can do this as well. The only other thing that I did on this roster was edited some of the players' shoes and their overall accessories. Not every player though, because the concept I was gonna go with was every team was gonna be branded by a specific brand. But after I realized I was gonna make this into a fantasy draft roster, I was probably gonna do that when I actually got into my MyLeague. Actually brand some of the teams out to specific brands. So and that's pretty much it. The only other critical thing I had to say about this roster, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to find a team with it though. A lot of the players' accessories were kind of off, I guess is the best way to describe it. So they were just random accessories. It felt like it might have been a player that had Nike shoes as their home shoes and have like a Reebok shoes as their away shoes. That's more of a pet peeve thing. That's not really a huge, problem, but that's something like this, for example. Like he's wearing Under Armour shoes for his away shoes, but then he's wearing Adidas shoes as his home shoes. When you're talking about a high school team, you typically wouldn't see that. And again, I'm not trying to be overly critical, but stuff like that are the things that I look at when you're talking about a roster and talking about it being specifically a high school roster. For the most part, on a high school team, you're going to have either the team wearing the same exact shoes, like it's like a team shoe, you can say, or something like that, or at least wearing the same brand. You're not going to see a team where everyone's wearing different shoes. You're seeing players that have some players that are wearing Under Armour, some players that are wearing Adidas. It just wouldn't happen that way. Again, that's more of a pet peeve thing. So that's why I originally want to go through and clean up all of that, so players were at least wearing the same brand. But I'll do that when I get to the MyLeague. I know this was an extremely long video, but I had a lot to talk about in this video. Everything will be in the description, and if you stayed this long, thank you and shout out to you. We'll have some more NBA 2K18 videos, we'll have some more roster videos, and just some overall more videos coming out very soon. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening to this whole video. Definitely like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and stay tuned. Check out the rest of my videos on my channel. Appreciate it. KC Classic 7 signing out.